We were wrong. Not the public, not the neighbours, not the family, the people who were supposed to know. The investigators, the supervisors, the department running this case from day one. They were wrong.
On February 10th, something appeared inside a Bitcoin wallet connected to the Nancy Guthrie ransom letters. Not a withdrawal, not a demand, a message, small, deliberate, 4 words that changed everything about how investigators understood this case. We are ready to talk. No one officially confirmed who placed it there. But when you understand how the FBI operates, the answer is not hard to find. And more importantly, when you understand what happened after that message was placed, the silence that followed, the complete and total absence of any response from the other side, you begin to see this case differently. Not as a kidnapping for money, as something else entirely. That is where this story begins. Today is day 87. Nancy Guthrie has not been found. No suspect has been named publicly. No motive has been confirmed on the record. And the question that has been sitting at the center of this investigation since the very beginning, the question that investigators have been circling quietly while the public watched and waited, is finally starting to have an answer. Not because someone made an announcement, because the evidence is speaking for itself. And what it is saying is this: the people behind those ransom letters may never have wanted the money. Not really. The FBI understood that. And on February 10th, they made a move that told the other side exactly what they knew. This is that story. But before anything else, before the Bitcoin wallet, before the ransom notes, before the 41-minute window that changed everything, you need to understand who Nancy Guthrie is. Because none of what happened makes sense unless you understand the woman at the center of it.
And just back to the head of homicide and cold case being moved out, I can't help but wonder if the people with more experience were still in those roles, if we would be in a different place now with the Nancy Guthrie investigation.
Nancy Guthrie is the mother of Savannah Guthrie, one of the most recognized faces in American television. An anchor on NBC's Today Show. A woman whose name opens doors, whose platform reaches millions, whose life is, by definition, public. But Nancy herself was private. She lived alone in the Catalina foothills area of Tucson, Arizona. A quiet neighborhood, a quiet life. A woman who showed up for her church live stream on schedule, who kept her medication where it belonged, who had a pacemaker syncing to her Apple devices, steady and consistent, the way a heartbeat should be. She was dropped off at her home at approximately 9:50 in the evening on January 31st Street. By morning, she was gone. When family members arrived at the house around 11 a.m. on February 1st and found no sign of her, they called 911 at noon. What investigators found when they walked through that door was not chaos. It was stillness. The kind of stillness that tells you immediately that something is deeply wrong. Her phone was inside. Her medication was inside. Her shoes were still there. The back doors had been propped open. And on the front porch, blood. Tested. Confirmed as Nancy's DNA. Hi viewers. Have you been following the Nancy Guthrie case since it first broke, yes or no? The doorbell camera had been disconnected at 1:47 in the morning. At 2:12, motion was detected, but there was no footage to show for it. And at 2:28 a.m., Nancy's pacemaker stopped syncing with her Apple devices. Whatever happened in that house happened inside a 41-minute window. And whoever was responsible for it did not stumble into that house. They knew exactly what they were doing. They disconnected the camera first. They moved deliberately. They left nothing visible behind. Almost nothing. Think about that for a moment. 41 minutes. That is how long it took. And in those 41 minutes, a woman's life changed, a family's world collapsed, and an investigation began that is still, 87 days later, building towards something. Now here is what the public timeline looked like in the days that followed.
We'd be in a different place. I can't say for sure that it would have been solved. I'll bet we would have been way farther down the road and possibly solved. It's one of those what if type things. And I think the reason, by the way, that
within hours of the news breaking, ransom notes began arriving. And this is where the first crack appears in the story everyone assumed they were watching. Because these notes did not go to law enforcement. They did not arrive through a private channel to the Guthrie family. They went to television stations. TMZ received one. 2 Tucson news stations received others. CBS Phoenix was among them. The notes demanded millions of dollars in Bitcoin. 2 deadlines were set, February 5th and February 9th. Both passed. No confirmed payment, no follow-up pressure from whoever sent them. No proof that Nancy was alive. Savannah Guthrie said publicly that she believed 2 of those notes were legitimate. 2. Not all of them. 2. That distinction matters more than almost anything else in this case because it tells you that someone, somewhere, had specific information. Information that felt real to a daughter who had every reason to want to believe all of them were real, and instead chose honesty over hope. And then came February 10th. CBS Phoenix, one of the stations that had received those original letters, confirmed that activity appeared inside the Bitcoin wallet connected to the notes. A small transaction, and alongside it, a message. We are ready to talk. Contact us. With a link for how to reach out. The other side never responded. Not in any way that became public. Not with a counteroffer. Not with a proof of life. Not with a single word. The channel opened, and then silence fell on the other end. But here is what no one has said out loud yet. The people who sent those ransom letters may never have wanted the money at all. And the FBI figured that out on February 10th. That message placed in the Bitcoin wallet was not a payment. It was not a gesture of good faith toward kidnappers holding a terrified woman. It was a signal, a controlled, deliberate signal from an agency that does not make moves without intention. It was the FBI saying, "We are here, we know this channel exists, and we are not afraid to use it. Come talk. Before this goes somewhere you cannot walk back from." The other side said nothing. And that silence is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of understanding who is really sitting on the other side of this case. Real kidnapping operations do not go public. That is not an opinion. That is a fact built across decades of federal case history. When someone takes a person and wants money in return, the last thing they want is cameras, reporters, and law enforcement attention. They want quiet. They want fast. They want the exchange completed before anyone with a badge has time to set up a perimeter. Every hour that passes in a genuine ransom situation is an hour the operation becomes more dangerous for the people running it. So they move quickly, they stay invisible, and they apply pressure directly to the family, privately, relentlessly, because that pressure is the only leverage they have. None of that happened here. The ransom notes in the Nancy Guthrie case went to television stations. Not a police tip line. Not a private attorney representing the family. Television stations. TMZ. 2 Tucson news outlets. CBS Phoenix. The people behind those letters chose the most public delivery mechanism available to them. And then they set 2 deadlines, February 5th and February 9th, and when both passed without a confirmed payment, they did not escalate. They did not send a follow-up note. They did not provide a single piece of verifiable evidence that Nancy was alive. They simply went quiet. That pattern has a name among federal investigators. Bad faith negotiation. And it was visible from day one. Think about what a real ransom demand requires. It requires the victim to be presented as alive. It requires pressure to be maintained on the family. It requires communication channels that keep law enforcement at a distance for as long as possible. It requires the kidnapper to care, genuinely care, about receiving the payment. Because the payment is the whole point. The payment is why any of it happened. Remove the payment as the real goal and the entire architecture of a kidnapping falls apart. And that is exactly what investigators were looking at. An architecture that looked like a ransom operation from the outside but functioned like something else entirely from the inside.
That there's all these feelings that the sheriff is out there for his own aggrandizement and for building up his department. And this kind of plays into that narrative. Whether it's true or not, it plays into that narrative.
Here is where Derek Colella enters the picture. On February 4th, a man named Derek Colella sent 2 text messages to members of the Guthrie family. The messages read, "Did you get the Bitcoin?" Colella was arrested. He told investigators he had been following the case on television and had pulled the family's contact information from a website. He had nothing to do with the disappearance. Nothing to do with the letters. Nothing to do with whatever actually happened inside that house between 1:47 and 2:28 in the morning. His trial is scheduled for June 23rd at the federal courthouse in Tucson. A man who inserted himself into a tragedy because he had been watching it unfold on a screen, just like millions of others. But his case is separate. Completely separate. And the reason that distinction matters is because his arrest created noise at exactly the moment investigators needed clarity. Because while the public was processing Kalela's arrest, something was already happening inside the Bitcoin wallet connected to the actual letters. The ones Savannah said felt real. On February 10th, reporter Brianna Whitney from CBS Phoenix, one of the stations that had received the original Ransom correspondence, confirmed that activity had appeared inside that wallet. A small amount of money placed there. And alongside it, a message. "We are ready to talk. Contact us." With a link. No response came from the other side. None that became public. Now, listen to what that means. A retired FBI agent with 25 years of field experience described what that deposit actually represented. It was not a payment toward the ransom demand. It was leverage. It was the FBI, or someone operating with their knowledge, walking onto the field and saying, "This is not a situation where you dictate terms and we comply. We are both in this. You need us to get paid. We need you to keep Nancy alive. That makes this a negotiation, not a transaction. And we are not going to behave like desperate people, because desperate people lose." That is not warmth. That is strategy. And the FBI was making clear from that moment forward that they understood what kind of operation this really was. Because when the other side went silent after that message, they confirmed it. Genuine kidnappers who want money do not ignore an open line of communication. They use it, they counter, they push, they keep the pressure alive. But whoever was on the other side of those ransom letters received an invitation to talk and chose not to speak. That choice told investigators something specific about who they were dealing with. Someone who either panicked, or someone who had already gotten what they came for. And if that second possibility is true, then the ransom letters were never the point. They were the misdirection. There is a glove, 2 meters from Nancy Guthrie's front door. That is where this story pivots. Because inside that glove, collected from the ground in the Catalina foothills of Tucson, investigators found DNA belonging to an unknown male. They ran it through CODIS, the national DNA database maintained by the FBI, containing profiles from millions of convicted individuals and crime scene samples. No match. Mixed DNA was also recovered from inside the home itself. Also run through CODIS. Also no match. 2 separate DNA samples. 2 separate dead ends through conventional testing. But here is what those results actually mean. They do not mean there is no answer. They mean the answer requires a different door. The doorbell camera captured one image before it was disconnected. A masked figure. Male. Approximately 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10 inches tall. Moving deliberately. No rushing. No panic. Carrying an Ozark Trail 25-liter backpack, a product sold exclusively at Walmart. A gun holster visible on his person. This was not someone who arrived unprepared. Walmart records were subpoenaed in an attempt to trace the backpack purchase. The suspect had chosen a store brand, a product available at thousands of locations across the country, the kind of item that is almost impossible to trace to a single transaction without a receipt or a loyalty account. Whoever stood on that porch knew something about operational awareness. They disconnected the camera before moving. They wore a mask. They carried gear. They came with a plan. So was this one person or two? That question has divided experienced investigators for weeks. Retired FBI profiler Jim Clemente argued in a previous breakdown of this case that the evidence near the front porch pointed to a single attacker. His reasoning was specific. If 2 people had been present, one would have managed Nancy inside while the other handled the exit. The blood evidence near the porch suggested a struggle that one person had to control alone, from beginning to end. Retired FBI agent Steve Moore looked at the same facts and landed differently. Statistically, he said, it is more likely that 2 people were involved. Holding someone against their will for any extended period of time is extremely difficult for one person to manage alone. But he would not commit fully. He said you cannot put your weight down on the ice. 2 experienced investigators. 2 conclusions. Neither willing to declare it settled. And that level of caution, from people who have worked some of the most complex federal cases in this country, means one thing. The physical evidence alone is not answering the question. Which is why the hair sample matters as much as it does. Hair was collected from the scene, sent to a private forensics laboratory in Florida. That lab subsequently sent the material, including the original sample, to the FBI for further analysis. An FBI official confirmed to ABC News that the Bureau had requested that material over 2 months before it was transferred. 2 months. That delay did not happen because of paperwork. It happened because of the Pima County Sheriff's Department. This is where the investigation developed a second problem. One that had nothing to do with the suspect and everything to do with the people assigned to find him. Emails obtained by Fox 10 in Phoenix revealed that in the period before Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, the Pima County Sheriff's Department had been in active communication with producers from a reality television crew connected to the A&E network. They were coordinating access to department operations. And those same emails revealed something else buried inside the scheduling correspondence. The heads of the department's homicide unit and cold case unit had been rotated out in the year before the suspected abduction. Removed, replaced. And when Fox News reported on the leadership of the investigation into Nancy's disappearance, what came out was this. The lead investigator assigned to one of the highest-profile missing persons cases in the United States in 2026 had no prior homicide experience. Read that again. No prior homicide experience. On this case, at this level, and then the crime scene was released before investigators had finished processing it. In a case built on microscopic trace evidence, hair fibers, skin cells, DNA transfer, biological material that exists in a space for hours before it degrades or becomes contaminated, releasing a scene early is not a procedural inconvenience. It is potentially the difference between a conviction and a permanent open question. Because once a scene has been re-entered after release, any evidence collected after that point becomes legally contested. Defense attorneys can challenge the chain of custody. What could have been definitive becomes arguable. The Pima County Board of Supervisors voted unanimously to question Sheriff Chris Nanos about the management of his department. A recall effort against Nanos is now underway. And the specific issue of the hair sample, the FBI requesting it, the Sheriff's Department declining to send it to the FBI laboratory and instead routing it to a facility 3,000 miles away, raised questions that a 25-year federal agent described as unheard of. If the experienced people had still been in those leadership roles, would the evidence have moved faster? Would the scene have been held longer? Would any of this have looked different? And buried inside the chain of custody of that delayed hair sample, investigators made a referral that has only happened once before in a case with this profile. And that case ended with a guilty plea. There is a laboratory in San Francisco that does not work ordinary cases. It does not process standard samples or run routine comparisons. It exists at the outer edge of what forensic science can currently do. And the reason it matters in this investigation is not just what it found. It is what its involvement signals about where the FBI believes this case is headed. This is the same laboratory that helped investigators identify Rex Heuermann, the man who pleaded guilty to the murders of 8 women in what became known as the Gilgo Beach serial killer case on Long Island. That investigation had gone cold for years. Conventional DNA testing had reached its ceiling. No database match, no direct identification. And then this laboratory used forensic genetic genealogy, a technique that constructs family trees from partial or degraded biological material, to trace the DNA not to the person directly, but to their relatives. And through those relatives, back to the source. The technique works like this. When a DNA sample cannot be matched to anyone in CODIS, the National Criminal Database, forensic genealogists take that same sample and compare it against consumer ancestry databases, the kind people voluntarily submit to when they want to know where their great-grandparents were born. From those comparisons, they begin building family trees. Cousins, aunts, siblings, parents, following the branches backward and forward until they arrive at a person who matches all the available biological data. It is not fast. It takes months. But when it works without a confession and without a witness. It works from the DNA alone. The FBI had requested Nancy's hair sample over 2 months before it was transferred. That delay is documented. The referral to the San Francisco laboratory happened after the FBI received the material. And the significance of that referral cannot be overstated, because that laboratory does not get called in when investigators are guessing. It gets called in when conventional methods have reached their limit and investigators need to go further, or when they already have a direction and need the science to confirm it before they act. Both possibilities lead to the same conclusion. They are not at the beginning anymore. They are building towards something specific. Sheriff Chris Nanos told investigators early in this case that he believed he knew the motive. He has not shared it publicly. He has offered no explanation for why he is holding that information back. In any other investigation at this level, that kind of claim, "I know why this happened but I am not going to tell you," would generate immediate scrutiny. In this one, it has been noted and filed, because every decision being made right now, by the FBI, by the U.S. Attorney's Office in Tucson, by federal prosecutors preparing the eventual presentation of this case, is being made with a courtroom in mind. There is a reward standing at $1.1 million. $1 million from the Guthrie family. $100,000 from the FBI. Nearly 40,000 tips have been submitted across the course of this investigation. U.S. Customs and Border Protection is involved. The FBI is involved. The Pima County Sheriff's Department is involved, despite its documented institutional failures. And federal prosecutors from the U.S. Attorney's Office in Tucson are involved, which tells you something on its own. Federal prosecutors do not attach themselves to cases that are going nowhere. Here is what the FBI is doing when it goes quiet. It is not stalling. It is not lost. It is not managing a case that has run out of leads. When the FBI stops talking publicly, it is almost always because the work has reached a stage where what gets said out loud can affect what happens in a courtroom. Every piece of evidence has to survive legal scrutiny. Every step in the chain of custody has to be clean. Every lead has to be followed in a way that is documented, defensible, and airtight. That work does not generate press conferences. It generates case files. Steve Moore, a retired FBI agent with 25 years of experience working cases exactly like this one, described it in a way that stays with you. Public trials, he said, not public investigations. Those are the two differences. The FBI wants everything to come out. They want every detail known. But the place where those details come out is not a news segment. It is a courtroom. And right now, everything being collected, everything being tested, everything being processed in that San Francisco laboratory is being aimed at that moment. Go back to February 10th. Back to that Bitcoin wallet. Back to that message left there by someone who understood how this case worked and wanted the other side to know it. We are ready to talk. And then nothing. No response. No counter. No indication from the other side that they were willing to engage, even when an open door was placed directly in front of them. That silence is behavioral data, and it tells profilers something about the psychological profile of whoever is sitting on the other side of this case. Genuine kidnappers motivated by money cannot afford silence. Their leverage exists only as long as the threat of financial pressure exists. The moment they stop communicating, the leverage dissolves. They know that. So they do not go quiet. They escalate. They remind the family what is at stake. They make the waiting unbearable. That is how it works when money is truly the objective. But this person, or these people, went silent after sending letters to television stations. Went silent after 2 deadlines passed. Went silent after an invitation to negotiate was placed inside the very Bitcoin wallet they created. 87 days of silence. And in those 87 days, not a single verifiable piece of evidence that Nancy Guthrie is alive has been made public. Savannah Guthrie said something in her first public interview after her mother's disappearance that no investigative summary can fully capture. She said, "It is too much to bear to think that I brought this to her bedside. That it is because of me." That statement is not evidence, but it reflects what federal investigators have been quietly exploring since the beginning. The possibility that Nancy was not chosen because of who she was. She was chosen because of who her daughter is. And if that framing is correct, then whoever planned this was not operating from desperation. They were operating from calculation. They identified a target. They identified a connection. And they moved on it. John Miller, a former FBI assistant director, described Nancy as someone who was, in his assessment, relatively defenseless, living alone, vulnerable, and connected to someone with significant resources and public presence. That is not a random profile. That is a profile that someone built deliberately. Someone who did their research. Someone who understood the connection between a quiet woman in Tucson and a face that millions of people recognize every morning. The pacemaker stopped at 2:28 in the morning. That detail does not leave you. It sits. It stays. Because it is the last confirmed biological marker of what was happening inside that house. Not a camera image, not a voice recording, a device synced to a heartbeat, going offline in the middle of the night, in a window of 41 minutes that no camera captured and no witness has come forward to describe. The DNA is at Quantico. The DNA is at the San Francisco laboratory. The family tree is being built from whatever biological material was recovered from that glove, from that floor, from that front porch. And somewhere inside that construction, a name is taking shape. Not a theory, not a profile, a name. Cases like this do not stay unresolved permanently. Evidence does not disappear the way people hope it will. People talk, mistakes surface. The kind of forensic work being done right now, the kind that cracked the Gilgo Beach case after years of cold silence, is not the kind you abandon. It is the kind you follow, methodically, carefully, all the way to the end. The investigation is active. The case is being prepared for trial, according to the agents closest to it. The reward stands. The tips are still coming in. And the San Francisco laboratory is still working. 87 days. No named suspect. No public motive. No Nancy. But the FBI does not prepare a case for trial against nobody. And the involvement of that laboratory, the same one that built a family tree out of cold DNA and handed prosecutors one of the most significant convictions in recent American criminal history, is not a routine referral. It is a statement. It says they know which direction to look. It says the science is catching up to whatever else they already know. And it says that when this case breaks open publicly, it will not be because someone made a mistake in front of a camera. It will be because a laboratory in San Francisco finished building something that started with a glove on a sidewalk 2 meters from Nancy Guthrie's front door. The next episode is where this investigation goes somewhere that has not been publicly connected yet. There is a specific detail inside the physical description of the suspect captured on that doorbell camera, something about how he moved, when he moved, and what he was carrying, that experienced investigators believe narrows the profile significantly. Not a guess. A conclusion built from behavioral evidence. And when you hear it, the entire timeline of that 41-minute window looks different. That episode is coming, and if this one gave you something, make sure you are here for it.